composer, and she really pushed for this to happen. And eventually we went, play with an orchestra. Yeah, why not? You know, it was a sort of interesting idea. And me and her sat and watched lots of videos of bands with orchestras, and mostly it was awful. And we sort of decided all the pitfalls, and we thought that if we're going to do it, it can't be me with an orchestra and a sort of bit of a band, you know, the solo artist type thing. And we didn't want to do that. And then we didn't want to have it like sort of the orchestra in the background and the band in the front. And so it had to feel like a 40-piece band. So it was all sort of, we were all together. And she did all the arrangement, and we had 2 days rehearsal and one shot at it. And it was kind of very strange, quite nerve-wracking, because orchestras are very loud and then they're very quiet, and then they're very loud and they're very quiet. And obviously the record was difficult because there's 60 open microphones on stage, sort of a microphone on a violin, which is very quiet, and just a few meters away, Michael's playing drums, full on.
I saw on the video they're surrounded by loads of perspex.
There's a bit of perspex, yeah. But even so, and then it's a kind of big venue, so with a sort of dome, temperature in Berlin, it's a big dome, so there's all this kind of noise from everything going down every microphone. All things considered, and the fact we only had 2 days rehearsal, it came out pretty good. And the thing that I really liked about it the most was that the musicians turned up for the rehearsals, and apart from Shiran and the conductor had kind of studied it and knew what we were going to be doing, none of the other musicians knew anything about what we were going to be doing. It was just another job. And so they start playing, and we weren't playing at the time. And bit by bit they're going, oh, we're quite into this. Yeah. And then we started playing with them, and they were like, oh my God. You know, it's a bit like that. But over the 2 days rehearsal, we all became sort of friends. And before the show, we went into they had the sort of big dressing room, because there was 39 of them or whatever it was. And we went into their dressing room and said, now this is punk rock. So forget everything that you're meant to be doing. You know, obviously you've got to read and play, but it doesn't matter about making mistakes, and it doesn't matter about the perfection of it. It's all to do with spirit. So we all went on, and it was good, actually.
It does sound good. I mean, I could say that because I'm not in the bands, but it sounds fantastic.
You've heard it?
Yeah.
Right.
William, your PR sent me it. So
yeah.
I mean, it really suits your music, because your music is quite dramatic. It's got a lot of atmosphere.
We've sort of played with orchestral things in the past. You know, we use string samples and sometimes real string players. And there are lots of our songs that have got that element to them anyway. So we did some of them, but then some of the other ones we picked, or she picked, or we picked together, were very odd. They weren't sort of the obvious ones at all. And we sort of arranged those.
So why would she pick those ones? Was that
I think she felt, she sort of listened to stuff and said, I could do something with this. You know, I've got an idea. And if it was something which was kind of fine without an orchestra, there was nothing to add, generally speaking, we didn't do those. You know? And there was a lot of sort of rearrangement for us. So, excuse me, we had to change the way we played and take out a lot of the original arrangements of guitars, and obviously there's no keyboards, but to make space for the orchestra. And orchestras, like I said, they're very quiet, and then they're incredibly loud, and then you're trying to hear, and I'm singing. And one of the things I like in orchestral music is stuff which is very kind of fluid, which is not really on the beat. You know, sort of Arvo Pärt and all that kind of modern classical music. And a lot of what Shiran did was kind of a bit like that. But there's no beat. So I'm trying to work out where I'm meant to be singing. And a couple of times I sort of just didn't come in the right place at all. So I couldn't work it out. But it sort of all worked out. I think at the end of it, we just all walked off stage and everybody embraced. And it was like 40. It was a 40-piece band. It felt like really good. And I think I quite like doing things. Everybody said you have to do it again now because it's written. Obviously, any orchestra in theory can play it. But there is something about doing things once that kind of appeals.
So it's just a one-off then?
Never say never, but we don't have any plans to repeat it. 2 days rehearsal, one shot.
Do you listen to a lot of classical music as well, or orchestras? You like film score or whatever, you know?
Yeah, I do actually.
So it's sort of in your creative DNA somewhere.
Yeah.
Because it kind of
I've never really been into classical music, you know, your Beethovens and Mozarts, but from the late 19th century, all that sort of stuff, and then 20th century especially all those weird Baltic composers like Arvo Pärt's the most best known. And I don't know if people know Arvo Pärt. If you don't know the music, you probably do, because it's all across television and films. And
he's amazing.
He's amazing.
Yeah. And people like Gorecki in Poland, similar kind of thing.
Yeah.
They seem to capture that sort of atmosphere that you capture when you make ostensibly rock and roll music. You know, it's the same moods that are in there. You know.
Yeah. Okay. I was talking earlier on. There's this little town in middle of Cardigan Bay in Wales called Borth, which is the most godforsaken spot in the world. It's completely bleak. And many years ago, I was on a tour bus one night, and we were talking, and my old partner Robert used to go on holiday there too. Our sound engineer Paul Harvey went on holiday there too. And we were talking about this love of bleak. You know, that empty, cold, freezing, grey beach, and that feeling you get from that sort of love of bleak.
It's a beautiful
and sort of other world. So I think with Nimbalami, we always sort of had this kind of thing where, on one level, we're kind of just a good rock and roll band. But at the same time, there's often this other element, other world.
I mean, are you aware of that? Do you tap into that, or does that just come anyway?
It just comes naturally, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, there's 4 of us in the band. We at the moment, but more or less everybody that's ever been in the band has got a little bit of this sensibility.
And speaking of which, you're also working on a new album.
We just finished the next Nimbalami record.
Hey!
Which will come out in January, I think. We just kind of finished it being mastered at the moment.
You do a lot of stuff, don't you? You always seem to have a new record coming out. I mean, are you very disciplined, very creative, or
not disciplined
both?
at all?
Yeah.
Completely undisciplined. But the best feeling in the world is creating stuff. I mean, people say, you know, what's it like now? How is it different from the beginning of the band? And the answer isn't really, because what happens is you get in a room with other people and you make a noise that you all collectively love, and you're kind of lost in it, and you've made this thing, and that's kind of the best feeling in the world. And 43 years later, it's exactly the same.
But do you find that your songwriting changed over the years? I mean, as a listener, it's like periods, and there's different parts of the sound. It's very obviously always New Model Army, but there's like different versions of New Model Army.
Yeah, I sometimes wish we could sort of change it, but there's certain things we can't change. I think this is true of all bands, is that I can't change my voice. I often wish I could, but I can't find a different style to sing in that
Well, you've never tried a
me.
falsetto or...
I can't do the falsetto. I can do it on the first gig of a tour, and after the first night of a tour, the falsetto is gone. You know,
Would you find as many ways you can convey as many different kind of emotions with the voice that you have? Is that the challenge?
I don't know, it's for other people to say. I mean, sometimes I find I've written songs that this really suits the way I sing, and you bang it out. And other times I write a song and I go, I'll do my best, but actually I think it suits somebody else more. I don't particularly write with myself in mind. And the other thing is that at the very beginning, New Model Army, after the first couple of years we had Robert on drums and Stuart Morrow playing bass, extraordinary musicians. And I couldn't really play for shit. And my first love was always soul music. And I was into the Northern Soul thing in the 70s and so on. So I understood from the very beginning that the most important elements of all bands are the bass player and drummer. And if you've got a good bass player and a drummer, and we've been blessed with a whole string of them, let them free. And that's where all the expression, the power and the drive, and so that's been the other sort of principle within New Model Army that's never really changed, that it's really all about the rhythm section. You know, this kind of drive and power and freedom, actually. For second bass players, free. You know.
The fluidity of the bass is a key part of the sound, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, and so that would set the template for the sound, but you don't have a template because you're always, again, you're saying that, but you're always reacting against it, aren't you?
What happens with New Model Army, people say, you know, that people think that because I'm the original member, it's me and some musicians, and it's really not. I mean, I was the only original member by 1985, actually, but all these other musicians have come through, and it's been like it's never a new band, it's a kind of organic change. Somebody comes in, somebody new arrives. And the interesting thing about that is it's not like the old band with the new person. All the relationships and all the dynamics within the band change with one new character. So it kind of feels like a new band. And then people develop within the band, and everything keeps changing. And I think if you're, you know, a writer, if everything around you within the band's changing all the time, that's really helpful. So it helps you not get stuck anywhere. Yeah,
I remember I interviewed once and you were saying you're not a creative dictator, innit? Then often the band tell you what to do, don't they? And is that like there's always got to be a boss,
I think the bands work by consensus. I really don't believe in democracy in bands. We rarely have a vote on anything. It's kind of dangerous. If you have votes, you start to get sort of blocks and friends that will back each other up, and then I think it's consensus. It's basically the person that feels most passionately about something persuades the others. And that's kind of how we've always worked.
Is that per song, or is that even in the direction the band's going?
From tiny details to whole songs. The interesting thing is how much we usually agree, actually. 99% of the time we eventually agree about something.
I'd imagine if somebody's to join New Model Army, they'd have a fairly good idea of what that New Model Army world is. You know, you're not going to join with a complete opposite idea, are you? I didn't know it was going to be like this.
I don't know what it is. It's just people that make music in a certain way with a certain attitude.
So what can we expect from your album? Is it where are you going with this? I mean, have you finished it yet? You said it's...
We'll finish the next record, yeah.
Yeah, so...
It sounds like us, only it doesn't sound like any of the other records. You know? It's like, it's got a particular identity. It's very... What are we, 2023? You know, other people, you know, you make something and everybody's got an opinion about it, and in a way we just make it go, we're pretty proud of this, we like it, we want to give this, and then everybody will have different opinions. Some people like it and some people won't, and that's fine. It's a little bit like doing gigs, and sometimes I talk to other front people in bands, and they always talk about the audience as if it's one thing. And I never really think that. I've never felt like that. I always think there's X hundred or thousand people here. They've, you know, you've all got different backstories, all got different kind of attitudes to life a little bit, got different favourite songs certainly, different loves in music, all like different other bands. So, you know, the audience isn't one thing. And then people respond in different ways. Some people want to go in the front and dance with other people. Some people want to dance quietly at the back. Some people want to scream and shout. Some people want to stand by the wall and just take it in, and whatever. It's just like the thing that you can't do. Well, I can't do it. Is that maybe it goes back to the whole punk rock sort of attitude. You can't say, everybody say yeah. Everybody clap. You just don't tell audiences what to do. I hate bands that do that. Tell me what to do. Fuck off. I'm here for music.
That wasn't meant to happen.
We don't try to dictate how people respond to it. I accept that everybody sort of responds to the music in a different way. Music's sort of fascinating anyway because it's completely individual. I think it's a bit like food. You can never tell people what they ought to like. They just like what they like. You like what you like. And there's some music which I know is brilliant. I understand it, it's brilliant. I couldn't create it in a million years. I totally respect it. Do I like it? No. and exactly the same with food. There's some food I know is good for me. I don't like it. and then there's some shit food that you love. Or there's, you know, there's something comes on the radio, some piece of pop, that is a copy of a copy of a copy made for money. But you can't help it, you love it. and we're all completely individual. And I think it's a big part of my favourite age with children is that kind of time between 8 to 13 when they're sort of becoming themselves. And that's kind of the time when we all discover the music that we're starting to discover music. And music is incredibly important to all of us, I think, in the way we discover ourselves. And again, it's completely individual.
It's quite interesting to say it because, I mean, New Model Army and the fans, it's like a large family, but it's a collection of very individual people who somehow meld into this very intense community. You know, when you look at it, you know, from the outside, whatever, it feels like that, it looks like that. You know, your gigs, they have an intensity of passion to them.
It is like that, and I have no idea why. I think that the band attracts. Actually, somebody told me once. I shouldn't say this to you people, but somebody told me, I know who likes New Model Army. And I said, really?
People who wear clogs.
And he said, yeah, I've worked it out. Who likes New Model Army? And I said, please tell me.
Yeah.
And he said, basically intelligent people trying to work through a large amount of personal darkness.
That sounds like a good place. So now are you aware of your responsibility?
No, I don't. So we don't really worry about that. This sense of responsibility. I think you do something you think is good, and you're proud of it, and you think it, and you give it to people. Do what you like with it. Responsibility. I don't know. I mean, from the very, very, very beginning of New Model Army, there was this, you know, rumours about this band from Bradford that were the new red hot left-wing socialist band. And the first song that anyone ever heard was Vengeance, which is deeply the opposite. And it had us, you know, when Red Wedge happened in the 80s, anti-Thatcher sort of movement of bands, we're going, yep, we're here, and it was like, not sure if we can quite trust them. Some journalist told me once that they were terrified to say they liked us because they didn't know what we were going to do or say next week, which I think as an artist is a terribly high accolade if you can, you know what I mean?
Because you're following your heart.
Yeah, you just, and a song anyway is a moment of truth, but it's a moment. It's not meant to be. I've never really believed in, you know, if you go through New Orleans songs, they're about stuff. And there are some principles perhaps running through but there's no philosophy. I remember when we started, you know, there were bands like Crass or Redskins, or where the music, and then it's later Chamber One Bottle or whatever, where the music is there really as a backdrop for the philosophy. And we never felt like that, ever. The music was to tell the truth of a moment. And I also quite like writing songs from points of view that I don't even agree with.
Would that be a personal truth, or would that be?
No, I
was that just testing yourself?
Trying to understand something. I remember at the time of the early '90s with the sort of nightmare of Yugoslavia, and I was trying to put myself into the head of a nationalist. And wrote My People Right or Wrong. It's not a position I agree with, really, but I wanted to sort of understand it, put it across. There's another one called One of the Chosen, which is about the joy of being a religious fundamentalist. You know, just trying to put yourself into somebody else's head. I think if you write novels or books, you're doing that all the time because you've got lots of different characters in a book and you've got to understand them all. And I kind of like doing that with songs as well. I've always liked that kind of country music thing where you start off with I and you tell a story, but it's not actually your story at all, you're telling somebody else's story. I think that's a great tradition.
So you can feel quite detached from the song itself.
No, you're trying to feel like the other person that you're imagining. You're imagining how they feel, I suppose.
Well, could that even be partially you? Like, you know, we are all lots of different people, aren't we?
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
You know, it's looking at the darker parts of the human psyche as well, which could be personal.
Yeah.
What do you get from that then? Do you find any kind of salvation, or just fascinating, just interesting?
Endlessly interesting. Life is endlessly interesting. And obviously I've been pretty blessed, but I think in general life is endlessly interesting.
And is it like the lyrics, you know, which way around does it go? Do the lyrics create an atmosphere for the music to match, or does the music suggest an atmosphere for the lyrics to spark you
I
off?
always tell the same thing actually, so I'll probably bore you if you've read it in an interview somewhere. We always work the same way, which is we have two cupboards. And in one cupboard, I write stuff, so I've got notebooks. So somebody tells me a story, or I read something in the paper, or I read a book, or I have an idea, or so, and that goes in notebooks, and that goes into stuff I want to write about, or I'm ready to write about. And sometimes it's a long rant, and sometimes it's just 2 lines into the cupboard. And in the other cupboard goes musical ideas. So here's a melody, here's a chord sequence. Here's a bit of bass that something, you know, Kerry's come up with or something. Drum beats, especially drum beats. Michael and Robert before him come up with lots and lots of quite original beats. And you fill up these cupboards with ideas. And then when they're full, which they're usually pretty full, you go, right, now we're going to write an album. And it's kind of easy. It's a bit like doing a jigsaw. You go, here, start with the drum beat. That chord sequence, that kind of works with it. What does that feel like? That feels like that idea, and then you go to that set of lyrics or whatever. And so you write a song, and the first one you always write is rubbish. So you throw it away, and you're not scared or intimidated or worried about failure because there's another 100 ideas waiting. So you just bit by bit piece it together. It's kind of like that.
It's interesting, the complexity of what you're doing. I mean, do you feel like music, rock and roll, rock music, whatever, is the perfect platform for that? Or do you ever feel like using other mediums, you know, like film or books? You talked about, you know, books having lots of characters before.
Yeah, people say you should write a book or something, but no, I quite like music. And the music, when I was growing up, music really made sense of everything, at all points in my life actually. Music, there are all these moments in your life and you need an explanation, or you need some kind of expression of that emotion, or you're puzzled about something, and you reach for some piece of music or something new, and it sort of, it answers all the questions. And music's extraordinary magic. You know, people say there's always been these things about, you know, what will kill music. You know, I remember tone taping will kill music. Now it's streaming will kill music. The only thing that kills music is overuse, I think. If you know, if music is on everywhere all the time, it starts to be a bit like wallpaper. It's a bit like, I don't know about everybody else, but my favourite songs I keep for the moments that I need them the most. Do you know what I mean? If I find something which I love, this piece of music to death, it always makes me feel something. Then you just don't play it too often.
So you actually
save it for the moments you need it.
You literally like the sound of silence as well. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure if anyone's a musician here, there isn't. In order to create anything, you have to have silence. You can't think about writing music when there's music going on. So, you know, you really want silence around you most of the time. I hardly ever play music at home. There's guitars lying around, piano, but you know what I mean. I don't listen to music all the time, actually. And if I do, the thing I listen probably to most is a French radio station called FIP, which is kind of everything that sex music ought to be, but it isn't quite. And they play, it's sponsored by the French government, so there's no adverts, and they just play 24 hours a day music, anything, in any genre, released in 1920 to yesterday. And 80% of what they play I've never heard, and I love that. You know, somebody's getting all this music and going, we'll put that with that. I remember listening one afternoon, and they do play a lot of jazz. You have to put up with a lot of jazz, which I'm not always into. But then they played something from Mozart, and then they played a track from Quadrophenia, and then they played J.D. McPherson. And you go, oh, this is my radio station. You know, this is like brilliant.
And do you find that sparks your imagination?
Yeah, it's stuff that I don't know, that I hear something. I think generally true, isn't it true that a lot of writers work by hearing or seeing something and then trying to kind of copy it, and they can't copy it properly, so they go off into another tangent, you know what I mean?
Would you find beyond that, it just sparks something, not to copy it, but just a different part of your mind to go into a different sort of creative space? I mean, it's not always copying the riff, is it? It's copying the atmosphere.
Yeah, I think music's something made of moments, isn't it? It's like the song goes along, and sometimes it's like all 3 minutes or 5 minutes, or whatever it is of the song, it makes you feel something. But there are a lot of songs that we all love that it's just that moment when the guitarist does that, and the drummer does that, and the singer does that, and something happens in that moment. Often in the studio it's kind of accidental. Something happens, and your whole body makes this kind of, you know, it's like a first kiss or something. Your whole body has this huge reaction to this moment, what you're hearing.
Is that something, maybe that's the fundamental here? Is that what, when you write a piece of music or you create an idea, that's what you're trying to do? Maybe
you're trying to do it, but a lot of what best things that happen when you're creating or recording happen by accident, always.
But you know when the moment is there, don't you? You get the
I
feeling.
mean, everybody says that another thing that's going to kill music is AI. No, it's not. You know, it's sort of nonsense. Yes, a computer can write a song that sounds a bit like another song. But I mean, people have been doing that for years. In Nashville, apparently, there are all these songwriters that go to work at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, and they get a hit song that's been really successful, and they change the words, and then they change the tune. And then they got the next hit song, which sounds a bit like it is. It's like, AI can do that. I can't see AI ever having glorious accidents.
I can't see AI doing it new model army either.
Can AI do nuance? You know, isn't it still, computers still, don't they still have to do 0 or 1? Doesn't everything has to be tick the box? It's like everything else in this fucking modern world that we live in. Tick the box is yes or no, innocent or guilty, right or wrong. Tick the box. Well, actually, our brains don't work like that at all. We're all capable of holding two completely diametrically opposed opinions at the same time. Computers can't do that.
No, and I think they're all the surface without depth. But I guess the problem will be when people don't really want the depth part.
What do we want? We all want different things at different times. What do we respond to? We're not quite sure what we're going to respond to.
One of the things I've always really loved about what you do is you operate completely in your own space, in your own world. And no matter what's going on in music, in culture, the rest of the world, there's always New Model Army just kind of going over there. I mean,
a little bit like that. We're a little bit like that. We sort of always, from day one, we reserve, a little bit like starting off with Vengeance, we reserve the right to do what we want to do. Of course, we're not completely in a bubble because we're listening to everything that's going on, and we're influenced by everything that's going on, and we're inspired sometimes by what's going on. But it's like, we're quite private. In these days of social media and stuff, we're always being told that we ought to be much more visible on social media and to tell people more about what we're doing and put out opinions about everything. And as people, we're not really like that, so we don't see why we should do it as a band either. We're quite private, and we make what we make behind closed doors. It's,
I mean, is that because, obviously, as
it's
people...
not particularly deliberate, but that is how we are as people anyway.
Yeah, it's not like trying to retain a mystery. It's just because it's just the way you want to be. Yeah. And it's always been like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I like this sort of idea that you're just somewhere in Bradford, which is not a place people often move to. Great city, but it's got, it's not like London or something. Everyone has to move to London or whatever, but you went the other way round, which is quite interesting as well, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I'm obviously a southerner. I went up to Bradford 40-something years ago. And I like it. It has certain redeeming features. One is that it's obviously surrounded by beautiful countryside. Now, 10 minutes out of Bradford and you're into a wonderful, wonderful place. Another thing is it's fucking cheap. So you never have to worry about your rent or the rehearsal room rent or any of this. You're not trying to. We never really had to worry about money. There always seemed to be enough food in the fridge. We never really. No one that's ever been in the band has ever really cared about money for its own sake, provided it was enough to live. Or so certain people's got children. Bring up children is expensive and so on. But we're never sort of money orientated. And the other thing about Bradford is that if you go back 200 years, there was nothing there really. So it's like 19th century boomtown. So there isn't this sense of, whether are you from there or not. I was talking to, some time ago, I was talking to a lot of Iraqi refugees this is about 20 years ago or something. But they've been stationed in various different cities around Britain, and they'd moved to Bradford. And I said, how do you like Bradford? And they said, we like Bradford. I said, why? And they said, because no one cares where you're from. And because it's always been an immigrant town, it's kind of a bit like that.
And is that something you like? That you can go, when you moved there, was it an opportunity to recreate yourself or to be yourself?
I don't know, I went to college there.
But you stayed, and I'm sure.
And I dropped out of college after a couple of years. I met Jules, and I met Stuart first, then I met Jules, then I met Robert, and started a band and went to a gig in 1979 by the Ruts, which changed my life.
Changed a lot of people's lives, yeah.
Greatest gig I ever saw.
And there's a backdrop of being there, slightly on the outside. Does that feed into the
Yeah,
whole
I
thing?
think in some ways, yeah. Again, you know, we never sort of went to rock and roll parties. We don't hang out with lots of other musicians, and again, we're all quite private people. I mean, not everybody's from Bradford. Actually, Michael Dean is the only true Yorkshireman in the band. He's from just up the road in Grassington. Yeah. But everybody else is from everywhere, just sort of fetched up in Bradford by chance. And when we were, after Nelson left, we were auditioning for a bass player, and we decided that we really wanted someone local. And we ended up with Kerry, who's from Stonemarket, because he was the best. And it's worked out great, you know, so he doesn't seem to mind commuting up to Bradford.
So when you so you're doing this sort of bunch of days now, I mean, how much does it change?
We're not actually, we're doing very little.
You play tomorrow, aren't you, as well?
Last night, tonight, we're doing a show tomorrow. We've got one show in Germany in a week's time, 3 at Christmas, and that's it, until the record comes out, and then we'll be touring from the end of February. So next year will be really busy.
Hey!
So these are just, there's no such thing as just treading water, of course, but these are like interim shows, remind people the power of the band, etc. But how do you decide what the set list is, you know? There's a lot of stuff.
That's really difficult. So there's 250 songs. You know, what are we going to play tonight?
Does it go on mood, or does it go on what you feel, the band feels, or the snapshot of that time, or the practicalities of what you're going to do?
Again, it's a kind of consensus thing. We go, and then sometimes if you play in a festival, obviously there's limited setup time and so on. So you want to keep it simple. So, and recently we have had a thing about, maybe partly because we did the orchestra thing last year, that the feeling since then, let's keep it, you know, it's quite rock and roll at the moment.
You're having a reaction.
But we do sort of change, and then it's slightly weird sitting on a whole album's worth of material now. You finish the record, but we're not going to play any of it because everybody's got a bloody phone. And if we play something new, they're going to be talking about whether they like it tomorrow morning in California, and that's I hate that actually. In the old days, we used to play songs before we recorded them, which is actually much better because you get kind of the song takes on a life on stage that wouldn't necessarily in the studio, and slowly people would take gigs, and slowly a cassette would make their way around. But now it's so instant. And then the trouble is the record comes out a year later and everybody's already bored of that song and they go, oh, I like the live version better anyway. And so
it spoils the impact of the statement of the record.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we've run out of time.
Okay.
Yeah. But thanks to Justin. Yeah.